Hello, can you hear me okay? Excellent. So I will be discussing health outcome comparisons between epilepsy patients who use versus do not use cannabinoid therapy. I have a disclosure. I'm recently a shareholder of CW Hemp. The reason why I stand before you is this little bundle of joy right here. The little inset picture is Zakai, my son, on steroids. One of the reasons I was attracted to cannabis as therapy is because he did fairly well using high-dose steroids, but he was a little 60-year-old man at the end of that. He had cataracts and bone loss, and the seizures returned anyway. He has a rare catastrophic form of early childhood epilepsy called Doose syndrome. He suffered seizures every single day most of his life, with the exception of about 8 months, 500,000 seizures by the time he was 5 years old, if you could imagine. By the time he was 9, we had recycled through 17 pharmaceuticals. He was transitioned to receiving hospice palliative services, and we wanted to consider using cannabis as a quality of life measure for Zakai. That's him getting an EEG in December of 2011 with his service dog, when the EEG showed seizure activity every 10 seconds while he was awake, even seizures that we weren't seeing, and 2 to 3 times that frequency while he slept. So his brain was on fire. That's him in a tire swing recently. He has used Cannabidiol, a preparation that's a whole plant botanical extract, for over 6 years. He's pharmaceutical free. 4 of those 6 years he was seizure free. And then puberty hit, so we're kind of hanging on white-knuckled through puberty. And I want to thank all of the researchers and the scientists that are in the room. It is a complete honor to stand on this stage, and doctors like Bonnie Goldstein and Dustin Sulak, who have taken the charge to help patients when their doctors don't have this tool in their toolkit. My hat is off to you. The research I found on, the research I found on PubMed was the light at an end of a very, very dark tunnel in my family's life. So we created the Realm of Caring Foundation. I want to be extremely clear. We are an independent 501c3 organization, an independent nonprofit. We focus on research. We're currently enrolling in 5 different studies. So if you're a doctor and you're trying to track patients, hit our booth, please. And if you are in the industry and creating fabulous products, you need to stop by too, because everyone needs to be putting their data in this registry. So we do research so that we can educate. We operate a call center. We field about 8,000 inquiries every single month. We've been on the phone over 1 million minutes counseling families who are trying to use cannabis as therapy, as well as doctors. And doctors are our 3rd highest referral source, so they figured out we're not a fringe group to get folks to, and we're building community. So we created an observational research registry because Zakai's story is just a good story. It's just an anecdotal story, what I call the amazingly amazing anecdotal story. But if we're not doing a good job of collecting this data in a scientific way, tracking what people are actually using, that they're actually able to get out in a dispensary or order through the mail, then I think we're doing a disservice. So I'm going to go over some data in our general registry, some epilepsy data from our general registry. We have an epilepsy-specific survey, and then we have a prospective cohort. We do have these available at our booth. We have a poster both that we can email you, both on epilepsy and autism, so you can receive this data. Dr. Brett did a pretty great job of discussing what epilepsy is, so I'm going to save ourselves a little bit of time here. It's important to realize, though, that 30%, sometimes up to 40%, they do have intractable conditions. The other thing I'll mention is that I believe statistically this still exists. Dr. Russo or someone else can help us who's a neurologist. That after the 3rd failed pharmaceutical, you have less than a 1% chance of finding one that's going to work. So when I think about our 14th and our 15th and our 16th and our 17th drug, that really makes me tear up. We do have quite a history of cannabis use in epilepsy for thousands of years, all the way to, of course, you guys are aware of an FDA-approved drug for epilepsy that's cannabis-based. So we do this in collaboration with Johns Hopkins University and the University of Pennsylvania. I'm biased, I get it. Plant saved my kid, kind of love the plant. So I looked for researchers who were very, very well published, who had published on the harms of cannabis as well as the benefits of cannabis. And so between my two principal investigators, they're very well published, close to 500 articles. We had a natural history experiment underway and an opportunity for phase 4 data collection. And so we're comparing health-related outcomes of cannabis users versus non-users, which is unique about our registry. We do have non-users or a control group. Most of the prospectives or observational studies that are happening in this space don't have that control group. So we're looking for trends in product use and dose, outcomes by health condition. We're evaluating those changes over time, and then we're evaluating the changes in those who did a baseline survey, who were not using cannabis as therapy, and then began using cannabis as therapy, and I think that's the richest data set. So I'm going to orientate you to these graphs real quickly. So on your left-hand side is always going to be cannabis users. On the right-hand side is non-users, and then our p-value or our statistical significance I've highlighted. They're emboldened there in dark. So this is all patient demographics. This data set was locked at about 2 years. So we've been collecting this data over 2 years. This was locked at about 2 years, and there's 1,400 people in this. They are statistically significantly older. No real statistical significance in race, and they're more educated. Isn't that great? I didn't expect to see that, so that's pretty cool. All patient outcome comparisons. Again, this is the larger registry. We're seeing quality of life statistically significantly improved, along with health satisfaction. Children are sleeping better, adults are sleeping better, anxiety is reduced, and depression is reduced. So we hear these anecdotal stories in the call center all of the time, but to be able to gather the data, use validated measures, go through the IRB process, and have Johns Hopkins statisticians spit out this is wonderful for us. We don't see the medications show up yet, but we'll see that in a later slide. This is the primary medical conditions that are in the overall registry. So we're serving mostly folks with neurological disorder, and that's due to a lot of the national media we've been able to garner over the last several years. So, you know, the first CNN special in 2013, and the national story has been told in regards to epilepsy quite a bit. We have seen our demographics change quite significantly. Originally, you know, back in 2013, all pediatric, 89%, and all catastrophic epilepsy, and we're now serving 65% adults and 35% children. Chronic pain is a very large diagnosis. In fact, in our adult population, that's just surpassed in our 50,000 families that we serve. Pain is the highest that people call into the call center with. And then you can see some of the other disorders there. All where there are strong mechanisms of action to indicate cannabinoid use. Now this is the epilepsy patient demographics, and this is 397, so 400 participants in the study. They are slightly older, and other than that, the demographics don't really show any statistical significance. So a wide variety. And many different diagnoses and seizure types. There's 40 different seizure types and diagnoses. We see Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and Dravet syndrome, Doose syndrome, which is what my son has, acardie, epilepsy as a result of traumatic brain injury, for example, or brain malformation. So we see a lot of different diagnoses represented in the registry. We're looking at cannabinoid therapy characteristics. So the vast majority of people are using a high CBD product, 38%. We do have some that are using a THC product only, 5%. And I think that the doctors who are taking care of patients in this area, you know, obviously see that as well. I was pleasantly surprised by this. We had a wonderful neurologist who did everything that he could do for my son. In fact, he was the first neurologist to make a recommendation back in 2012 for Zakai for our state's cannabis license. Usually you go to a doctor that's not practicing, who may just have a cannabis practice. So he did everything that he could. In this registry, 23% did not have doctor's recommendations and 22% did. When you're looking at, I think doctors are concerned about folks just starting to use weed and not using drugs, specifically in epilepsy, that actually work 70% of the time. But we're not finding that. We're finding most people are turning to this as a last resort, 34%, and using it as an adjunct therapy. So they're adding it to their pharmaceutical regimen. A very small percentage, only 4%, are using this as frontline medications, and 12% are using it as second-line medication. We have a little girl named Melody. She has Aicardi syndrome. Generally, Aicardi has a very poor outcome, and they generally don't walk and talk. Often they need feeding tubes. I just got a video of Melody, who has sight words, who's learned her alphabet. She's starting kindergarten, she's dancing, and this was their second-line therapy. They tried Depakote, and then they turned right to cannabis. And so what I'm excited about, elated about, is that people are turning to this sooner. They don't have to wait a decade like we did, where health outcomes are significantly affected for the rest of their lives. Zakai will probably be dependent on us, into adulthood, and then we've got to figure that out afterwards. So I'm actually really excited that people are turning to this as medicine sooner rather than later. The reason why I did pull out the CW hemp use was because 61% of the epilepsy population were using some sort of product from CW, and because it's a regimented product, we're able to see exactly how many milligrams that is. So I wanted to give you some variances in dosing. If you attended the CME course yesterday, you learned that there's this really, really wide range, and we see that here as well. This is, when you turn these into milligrams, this is 7 milligrams a day up to 600 milligrams a day of CBD. The average is 2 milligrams per kilogram. And I think this is really important for doctors to recognize, because if you're looking at double-blind placebo-controlled trials to give dosing for a whole plant botanical extract, where those don't match up. And so I think they start Epidiolex at 5 milligrams per kilogram, and we're seeing 20 or 25 milligrams per kilogram. So it's really important to recognize there's quite a dosing disparagement there. People, of course, are using many different products. Some are very difficult to figure out how many milligrams they're using. So high THC cannabis flower is the top one, 14 users, and so they would use 14 joints per day. So of course that's really difficult to figure out how many milligrams they're using. But people are accessing what works for them, which is, I think, frustrating for people, but incredibly empowering to people like me who I appreciate pharmaceutical. I'm very thankful for its role, but it was a big ball and chain for my family and I, with very severe side effects for a very long time. So the individualized medicine piece kind of scares people. The nice part is this is individualized medicine, and you can figure out what's going to work for you. So health characteristics, we see health satisfaction statistically significantly improved, as well as children sleeping better and adults sleeping better. Anxiety is clinically improved, but not statistically significantly improved in this population. And then depression is also statistically significantly improved. And then we don't see prescriptions show up quite yet, but we do in a future slide. Healthcare service utilization. So this is economic data to me. So if they're on less pharmaceuticals, if they're going to the doctor less, emergency room visits and hospitalizations, that's a financial burden often to Medicaid, because a lot of the families we serve have disabilities. And so we're seeing less outpatient visits, we're seeing less emergency room visits, and less hospital admissions. We're seeing a few less sick days too, although not statistically significant. Now, this is a relatively small N, it's 24, and in that large registry, we have an epilepsy-specific survey, so we need to get more people completing this additional survey. But hospital visits are down, both seizure-related, outpatient visits, ER visits, and hospital admissions. We've got the seizure activity is down, so 42 seizures about to 16 seizures, so that's statistically significant. And then the length of the seizure is decreased. That's about 3 minutes and 40 seconds to about less than 2.5 minutes. So clinically significant, certainly if you've ever held a loved one who's having a seizure. And 5 of these 24 reported no seizure activity in the past month. Of the 29 non-users who initiated use, quality of life shows up here, health satisfaction statistically significantly improved, as well as children's sleep. Anxiety statistically significantly improved. Depression is off the charts there. You see prescription medications about 25% reduced. Over-the-counter medications are statistically significantly reduced. And when asked, 275 respondents, this is free text, so they can just, it's quantitative data, they could just type it in. They were asked, how has therapeutic use of cannabinoids helped? 275 respondents just typed things in. 52% reported reduction in seizure activity, 18% reported an improvement in cognition, which we've heard from earlier speakers, 13% reported improved mood, and 12% reported a reduction in their seizure duration. When asked about harms caused or problems associated with cannabinoid use, 64% typed in, hey, we're not having any issues. But there is a small percentage of folks that are having issues. 4% reported increased seizure frequency, usually at initiation or at the time of a dose increase, which can level out. 4% reported a problem with cost. 3% reported consequences with legality or concerns with legality. And then 2%, so a very small side effect profile, GI-related issues, feeling foggy or tired, interactions with their anti-epileptic drugs, or the stigma associated with cannabis, which unfortunately still exists. So in conclusion, this observational study was conducted with a diverse group of epilepsy patients. Cannabis therapy users scored better on most health-related outcomes measured compared with a demographically similar control group. Outcomes replicated and were corroborated by the prospective study of a subgroup who were controls at baseline and then initiated use. So that's always a little checkbox for us to take a look at. CBD products were used by the majority of these folks, often as a last treatment choice, and many cases of substantial positive clinical and quality of life impact for individuals, which is what our world revolves around at Realm of Caring. Adverse consequences are rare, but they do certainly present in a subset of participants, so I think it's important to look at that. And we definitely need a larger sample group for more subgroup analysis, so to just pull out Dravet.
1 minute.
To just pull out Doose syndrome, for example. So some limitations I definitely want to discuss is that there are a variety of cannabis products available, and so dose calculations fairly difficult. It is a convenient sample. There certainly could be some bias in reporting that should be considered. The data is limited to self-report, either of themselves or of a caregiver, so there could be a lack of objective assessment. I think that's a limitation, but I think a true strength of the study is that we're asking for a report of current status, and that's going to minimize recall bias, and there's really no incentive for them to lie on the survey, and certainly label accuracy is also an issue. So a special thanks to my principal investigator, Ryan Vandry, Marcel Von Miller, Aaron and Nick, Joel from my team, my entire team at Realm of Caring. We do have a booth, so please come check us out. All the participants who supported this body of evidence. And lest we forget, this isn't about cannabis, it's about community. So thank you very much.